the issues affecting Asia's animals, and the stories of the people working on their behalf. We'll be taking you on a tour of what's been happening lately in the animal protection space around Asia, and also bringing you updates from our huge network of animal protection organizations and our many working groups. Welcome to the Asia for Animals podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Asia for Animals Policy Podcast. I'm your host, Ngoc Anh Nguyen, the Policy Lead Coordinator for the Asia for Animals Coalitions. Today, we're diving into a crucial topic at the intersections of animal welfare and climate policies, particularly in the context of recent developments at the Bonn Climate Change Conference in June 2024 and the upcoming COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. We have a very special guest today, Angel Flores, International External Affairs Manager from World Animal Protections, who not only attended the Bonn Conference, but is also preparing for COP29 later this year. Angel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Ngoc Anh.
Before we get started, Angel, could you introduce yourself and tell our listeners a bit about your role at World Animal Protections and what drives your passions for animal welfare and climate advocacy?
Of course, yes. So, hello everyone, and thanks for listening to this podcast today. I'm Maria Angela Flores, but as you've heard from Ngoc Anh, you can call me Angel. At World Animal Protection, as International External Affairs Manager, I play a key role within our external engagement team, supporting our campaigns on food systems and wildlife. Currently, I lead our climate advocacy within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, as well as coordinating with specific development banks to call for policies that integrate animal welfare, climate, biodiversity, public health, etc. So my passion for animal welfare and climate advocacy is deeply rooted in my personal experiences. So growing up in the Philippines, which is one of the most climate vulnerable countries, I've seen firsthand the effects of climate change on communities, animals, and the environment. So I am a lover of animals. I'm a proud cat mom to 5 cats whom we have rescued together with my husband, who is a veterinarian by profession. So aside from, this exposure to animals, as well as my work within international development space, I thought that it would be great to combine these different passions and really apply it within the animal welfare world. So I have over 15 years of development work experience, and I came to a point where I thought to myself, how can I use the skills and competencies that I have gained to benefit animals and nature? And also, I have within my own personal advocacy the desire to elevate the representation of Global South women leaders within the animal welfare space. Because as you know, this space, there needs to be much more inclusivity and diversity. And we have narratives that we can also share to the global stage. So this led me to World Animal Protection, and I've been with the organization since 2021. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Angel. You have mentioned so many points that also, I think, resonate to a lot of our listeners here. I think that a lot of us begin this work due to some personal reasons. Maybe it's to improve the representations of women in various movements. Maybe it's to solve problems in their own regions or countries. Yeah. So thank you so much for working so tirelessly for the movement and for always bringing the best efforts in your work. I would like to begin the first questions on the Bonn Conference for this year. Angel, you have attended the Bonn Climate Change Conference in June. Can you give us a brief overview of the key issues discussed at Bonn that are relevant to animal welfare and why it was important for world animal protections to be there?
Sure. So just to level off on, say, the terminologies and what these different events are. So ahead of each conference of parties, which is the COP, there are intersessional sessions. So this is what we refer to as the Bonn Climate Conference that happens every June. And these sessions are held to make progress on important technical issues and to prepare decisions for adoption at the COP. So that means that the recent COP, SB, which is SB 60, was actually to prepare decisions for the COP29, which will happen in Baku, Azerbaijan later this year. So the Bonn Climate Change Conference was the first opportunity for all parties and observer organizations to the UNFCCC to meet since COP28 in Dubai last year. So, as many of the followers of the UNFCCC COP know, there was really a good momentum that we gained back in Dubai. So, food systems was part of the debate, the agenda. There was the first declaration on food systems and agriculture. There was a health and climate declaration as well, and a joint call on nature and a non-state actors call at that. So we see these different outcomes from COP28 as very significant for our campaigns against animal cruelty and against factory farming. So that is the focus of World Animal Protection. So in the last SBs, we focused mainly on the agriculture negotiations, which is called the Sharm el-Sheikh Joint Work on Implementation of Climate Action on Agriculture and Food Security, which is a very long name, and we can call it SSJW just for brevity. But at the Bonn conference, finally, after 18 months since this was established back in Sharm el-Sheikh, there is now an agreed roadmap up to COP31. So that is a modest breakthrough given where the discussions had been in the past 18 months or so. So we welcome this progress, but indeed there's more acceleration in terms of the discussions and the debates that need to happen there. We also saw in Bonn this focus on the nationally determined contributions. So these are the climate targets that are submitted by each of the countries every 5 years. And the new and enhanced NDCs, which we call as NDCs 3.0, is due in early 2025. So this then provides an opportunity for us to present our asks to different negotiators. Aside from the food systems transformation, we also work closely with the World Federation for Animals to bring wildlife protection as part of the equation. So other work streams that we are monitoring, say the adaptation and the mitigation work program, there were mixed reviews as to the outcomes. Some have been slower than the others, and negotiations have been fraught with division. But overall, at least there are pockets there that we can certainly use as further entry points to build momentum over the next few months and years.
Thank you so much, Angel, for clarifying so many terms and for the very comprehensive breakdown of the developments at both COPs and at the Bonn conference. In your opinion, I think that what would be interesting also to cover would be some of the challenges. What would you say were the challenges you face at the Bonn conference or, at COPs, especially concerning the implementation of climate policies that integrate animal welfare?
Sure. Reflecting on this question, I guess at the Bonn conference, similar to previous COPs and intersessionals, we continue to face several challenges regarding the uptake of climate policies that integrate animal welfare. One major hurdle is that animal welfare is not a priority within the space for many policymakers. When I say it's not a priority, it means that it's not in the top, say, 3 to 5 things that people want to agree on at the end of the day, right? This lack of priority makes it then difficult to get traction on issues that link climate change with animal welfare. Additionally, there is a significant gap in awareness and understanding of how animal welfare intersects with climate action. So the link is not as clear as we want it to be. Some delegates are not fully aware of the profound impact that animal agriculture has on greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, and biodiversity loss, or they are not ready to tackle it. Another challenge that we have also seen, and it has become ever more present in the past years, is this entrenched interest and powerful lobbying from industries that benefit from the commodification of animals. So these industries, such as factory farming, they have significant influence and resources, making it hard to push for transformative changes in the food system that would reduce reliance on factory farming and promote sustainable and humane practices. Finally, I think one thing to also bear in mind, which is again a challenge, but there's a way to address them, is that aligning various countries' policies and priorities is very complex. So each country has different socio-economic contexts, different levels of development, which then in turn affect their readiness and their willingness to integrate animal welfare into their climate agendas. But despite these different challenges that I've mentioned, the conference also provided a platform to build alliances and raise awareness. And I believe that this then sets the stage for more integrated approaches in the future. And we can definitely use this to our advantage as well.
Thank you, Angel. I was going to ask about what progress was made that would give us some hope moving forward, but you have already mentioned that in your answers for the previous questions. So I think the next logical step is to dive a little bit into the role of wildlife in climate change mitigations, particularly the side event called Wildlife and Climate Change Animals for NDCs that was co-hosted with several organizations, one of which is the World Federations for Animals last June, SP60. Could you elaborate on the significance of this event, how it may influence future climate actions, particularly the reasons why you and other leaders of the working groups with World Federations for Animals picked these topics, the key takeaways from that side events?
Yeah. So the side event that was held was around wildlife and climate change, animals for NDCs, and this underscored the critical contributions that wildlife make to ecosystem health and climate resilience, highlighting how their protection, their preservation, and restoration is integral to achieving the Paris Agreement goals. Thus, our call to action really is to include actions around wildlife protection in countries' updated or enhanced NDCs. So the significance of this event really is in bridging the gap between wildlife conservation and climate action. And there was a showcasing of concrete examples as well as data on how protecting wildlife and their habitats can enhance climate resilience and therefore contribute to emissions reduction goals. So together with World Federation for Animals and other members, this side event really helped to elevate the discourse on the importance of integrating wildlife considerations into climate strategies. So just to say that as part of this work we have with the World Federation for Animals, There's going to be an inventory that will be launched soon to support this work and to help different governments and how they can integrate wildlife as well as food systems transformation within the NEC. So stay tuned.
Thank you, Angel. And I think, are very excited to see the launch of the inventory. Just a tiny follow-up on that. What would be the advice that you could give to smaller NGOs that are quite new to policy advocacy and working particularly on wildlife conservations and protections? How would you say they can participate and engage more effectively with any processes with the UNFCCC?
Yeah. I think it's going to be around a national level advocacy because, the discussions within the UNFCCC is very much setting the agenda. But this agenda setting can only be translated to concrete policies on the ground through national level lobbying and advocacy. And that's where other stakeholders, organizations of different sizes can really play a role in bringing those messages to their governments and the different focal points at the UNFCCC. So there are designated focal points for each country. So this can be, you can find the list of this at the UNFCCC website, and they are the ones that are in charge of looking after the commitments that their particular country is making as regards the UNFCCC. So it's a first communication entry point for those who haven't yet engaged their governments. You can send letters or set up meetings with them. So this inventory that I just mentioned, you will find the different policy actions and intervention areas that you can discuss with your governments, and we, together with the World Federation for Animals, is definitely open to sharing more about this and supporting all of you towards national level advocacy. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Angel, for the practical advice for our audience. Let's move on a little bit to COP29. So looking ahead to COP29, what are the key advocacy points that the animal welfare community should focus on at this point? And how can we leverage the modest progress made in Bonn to push for more robust inclusions of animal welfare in climate policies at COP?
Okay, so looking ahead to COP29, the very clear area for engagement for us is the updating of the nationally determined contributions. So we can focus our efforts in lobbying our different governments to integrate NBCs that will protect animals. So that's from now until next year. We have this concrete opportunity to work with our governments, and here are some of the things that we can ask them to do. So one is to highlight the importance of equitable, humane, and sustainable agricultural practices in reducing emissions and promoting climate resilience. We can advocate for stronger protection of wildlife and their habitats, and emphasize the role of animals as well in ecosystem services, habitat maintenance, which are also very essential for climate mitigation and adaptation. And we can also really have a stronger voice to push for policies that transition away from factory farming and deforestation towards truly regenerative and agroecological approaches. So those are some of the things that come to mind at the moment. Yeah, I guess we should really just continue engaging with allies and expanding the coalition of supporters to build on the momentum gained over the past year or so on food systems.
Yeah. Thank you, Angel, for that very informative answers. To prepare for COP29, I would like to touch upon the upcoming workshops on agriculture and food security as part of the Sharm el-Sheikh joint work. that seems to offer strategic opportunities. How do you see these workshops being utilized to advance animal welfare within the broader climate agenda?
Yes, that is clearly an opportunity for us moving forward. So the upcoming workshop under the Sharm el Sheikh Joint Work has one workshop that is focused on systemic and holistic approaches to climate action. And this is the pathway by which we can advance animal welfare within the broader climate agenda. So this workshop will be crucial in discussing how agricultural practices can be reformed to support climate goals, and this is where we can bring our point that sustainability and animal welfare is very much interlinked, and the prevention of animal cruelty, the protection of the environment, and safeguarding local food systems will be key to building a humane and sustainable food system. So at the Bonn Climate Conference this year, World Animal Protection launched a Just Transition white paper, and this actually includes a roadmap with more than 100 policy recommendations. So these policy recommendations will vary in priority, relevance, and applicability depending on local and regional contexts, including current legislations, cultural sensitivities, etc., and how entrenched industrial animal agriculture is in that region. So our collective focus is to call for a phase out of industrial animal agriculture and on promoting and actively pursuing alternatives, steering towards a just transition for a more equitable, humane, and sustainable food system, but of which animal welfare is a critical component.
Yeah, thank you so much, Angel. I think that one particular part of the previous answer that would be interesting to explore a little bit more would be to the white papers that you mentioned. I think that for many of our audience, or even myself, we may have limited experience working to build a white paper to submit to major global policy platforms. What would you say would be the key things to mention in those white papers? Or what was your experience working on this white paper and the one before, especially within the UNFCCC context? And how can we, improve the language to make it a little bit more effective?
Yes. Okay, so World Animal Protection is currently a member of the global campaign to demand climate justice. And we sit as the co-chair of the Food and Agriculture Working Group of DCJ. It's led by a colleague of mine, Elodie Guillon. And in the development of this paper, this has really been developed in consultation with different communities across the globe. So a draft was developed by a core writing team of different organizations representing different expertise. And then the draft went through an extensive consultation amongst frontline communities and impacted groups, which include youth, women, farmers, peasant and worker organizations across 35 countries. So we are really very proud of this work because it represents diverse views and it takes into account really the perspectives of those who are the producers and those from different contexts across those different countries. So to date, more than 40 organizations have endorsed this white paper, and a localization of the paper is happening in a few countries in Africa as well. So I think the key really to developing a white paper such as this is bringing together different parts of the movement. So climate movement, environmental groups, animal welfare groups, biodiversity groups, farming groups, etc. So when we discuss a just transition, it impacts everyone. So it has to also go through a very inclusive process at that.
Thank you, Angel. That was very insightful. I'm sure that our audience can take a lot of points from this podcast. Okay, let's move on to the area of engaging with policymakers. which could be very challenging, especially when advocating for issues that may not be at the forefront of the climate agenda, like you mentioned, which was the case with many of our animal welfare asks. How do you approach these conversations to ensure that animal welfare is recognized as a critical component of climate resilience?
The first thing to really consider is to frame the issue in the context of climate goals. So we need to remember that governments engaging at the UNFCCC, their main mandate is to look at how their countries can meet the Paris Agreement goals, their commitments to the convention. And the convention is basically around reducing emissions. So framing our issues within the context of the climate goals will be key in bringing policymakers in. So what is the climate goal? Basically, it's mitigating climate change, it's adapting climate change, it's about means of implementation and so on. So highlighting our costs in alignment to those will be key for a successful advocacy engagement with them. Secondly, it's presenting hard evidence and case studies, really providing data and real-world examples, showing the benefits of, say, equitable, humane, and sustainable food systems. We also need to connect our priorities with other national priorities of these policymakers. Say, for example, is it food security that's important to them? Is it public health? Are they concerned about deforestation in their country? Is biodiversity loss a problem in that country as well? So looking at a broad analysis of the context of the country will be very important. And finally, maybe another thing to highlight is the need to also build alliances and support. We cannot achieve the change that we want by working in isolation. We can lobby governments through and through as World Animal Protection, but it is important that we have a collective voice, that we are collaborating with other organizations and stakeholders, again, across various movements that who are aligned with our principles and perspectives to bring a stronger voice and show that there is broad-based support for our issues.
Thank you so much, Angel. I think that you mentioned a critical points here of working together with other organizations in order to bring out a collective voice for these issues. And I think this is particularly true for such a big and intricately complex events like the COP. I have a tiny follow-up questions on this, which deals a little bit more with the actual experience attending COP and engaging with the national delegates. I think a lot of points that you covered are deals with the official side of policy advocacy. But do you think that it's also important to meet and discuss with national delegates while they're attending these events? Would it be very difficult to do so? And what would be the tips for anyone looking to do this?
Yeah, I think the first tip that I will share is that the advocacy should not happen just at the COP. So, for example, World Animal Protection has a global presence, and we do work with our different country offices in engaging various governments. So prior to the COPs, there are already discussions happening, their level, and then when we are at these big events, which are very massive, there's a lot going on, especially the COP itself, then it's now trying to cement those relationships. So I think the key there is to keep ongoing communication to maintain the issue's importance for these different stakeholders and to have it like a long-term engagement approach rather than just like one-off through the climate conference or through the COPs itself. So it really entails coordination across different levels, including working with coalitions and global working groups at that as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the enlightening guide. Okay, I think I'd like to touch upon public awareness and support as well. This is often crucial in driving policy change. So how can we, as advocates, better communicate the link between animal welfare and climate change to the general public to garner more support for these issues, aside from what we're also doing with the governments?
Okay, this is very important. This is having the people power to support our policy ask. We'll build a critical mass rather to help our campaign succeed. And for me, what I've noticed, because I finished a communications degree in my undergraduate course, development communications, one thing that I constantly think about is that the communications landscape nowadays has evolved dramatically. And we need to adapt to these changes to effectively advocate for animal welfare in the context of climate change. Today, we must also actively combat disinformation, which we know a lot of the big industry lobby groups are funding different campaigns to counter our efforts because of the threat of their businesses being transitioned into a different model. So it undermines our advocacy efforts in that way. Media plays a crucial role in shaping public perception. And sadly, when we look at media today, the issues of animal welfare in relation to climate change still pales in comparison to other issues of the day, whether that's fossil fuels in relation to climate change, transport, and so on. So we need to leverage the media and build relationships with reputable journalists to effectively amplify our message. This also means that we go beyond traditional media and also reaching out to, say, influencers who can advocate on our behalf and mobilize their networks to help build broader support and drive meaningful action.
Thank you so much, Angel. And I think that climate change is also an issue that intersects with many other social and environmental movements. So how can the animal welfare movement collaborate with other sectors such as human rights or environmental justice groups to strengthen our advocacy efforts, maybe at events like COP29 or, in general, like you said before with the previous questions, to ensure that those efforts, the opposing movements or groups, are not able to significantly undermine our work. Yeah.
Yeah, that is really critical as a part of the campaign to work with the movements and to highlight, shared goals. There are intersectionalities when it comes to what we want to achieve, whether that's promoting, say, sustainable practices and protecting livelihoods of traditional or indigenous farmers. Could it be protecting vulnerable communities? We need to identify what binds us together with those different movements. And we should build a united front that amplifies our collective voice. So, in our experience as well at work, animal protection, and working with various climate alliances, Climate Action Network, and the Demand Climate Justice, we do joint campaigns. We do coordinated interventions during negotiations. So that happened in Bonn when we wanted to speak up against solutions such as sustainable intensification that was being brought to the table. So together with other movements and alliances, we delivered joint interventions so that it creates a more solid voice for us collectively. So there are also other opportunities to do this, whether that's doing some form of actions or protests outside the venue and so on, so that it also has the outsider approach when it comes to being seen and being heard and handling our impact at events like this.
Thank you, Angel. For these questions, actually, I would like to ask a little bit follow-up questions as well. Yeah, so I think that sometimes it's not very easy to collaborate with other movements, whether it's a social or environmental movement. Sometimes people working in a certain movement prefer to, focus on, other colleagues that are also focusing particularly on this cause alone. So, like on the practical side, what would you say would be the advice for people looking to collaborate with colleagues from outside of the animal welfare movements? How do you think we can find partners that are willing to work with us?
I think it's building trust. We should be very clear right at the onset of building these alliances and these partnerships of where we stand, what our positions are, and really identify what are our points of convergence and divergence. So it is from the beginning of a relationship, we already know what we bring in, what they bring in, and that sets the parameters by which we want to work together. So for example, in our case, what we want to see is to have a phase out of factory farming. And within that vision, there are many others who are also wanting to see that, say, for example, indigenous communities that have been displaced by the development of factory farms within their communities. There are also environmental groups that are concerned about water and air pollution within factory farms and nearby communities. And there's the public health agenda as well. So really looking at these different commonalities and seeing how we can work together, what expertise we bring in, what value we bring in these different coalitions, then that becomes the basis for unity, Yeah, I agree that it's not an easy process, but yeah, I'd say it's by having mutual understanding and building trust. That's the way that we should go and move forward.
Yeah, thank you so much, Angel. I completely agree with your points. And I think originally I planned to ask some other questions, but I think that you managed to cover a lot of them in your previous answers already. So the next question is actually practical, or any advice that you could give first our coalitions, Asia for Animals, to help our members effectively engage with the UNFCCC processes or any other policy platform at all to make sure animal welfare is not sidelined. And yes, secondly, it's for other, maybe it's a network like us or any other organizations to do the same.
Yeah. Okay. So I think very much connected with my previous answer. It's about adopting a holistic approach when we advocate for the integration of animal welfare into climate policy. So our advocacy must be contextually appropriate and tailored to specific circumstances to effectively move governments and others, move them to action without alienating them. It's essential that we propose solutions that are inclusive and do not marginalize other stakeholders or lead to negative consequences for others. Our goal is to shift the discourse from viewing animals merely as commodities, because this is the root cause of the problem, right, Ngoc Anh? The thing why factory farming is there, why the wildlife trade is there. It's because animals are being viewed as commodities. So within these spaces, at the back of our heads, I think the guiding mission is really to move people away from that mindset and to move them to value and protect animals as sentient beings. And we don't need to exactly say those words as we start, relationships and so on, but really hear from other stakeholders what are the things that are important to them, and find connections and and find those comrades within the system that want to make a difference and want to see systemic changes as well. So that would be my perspective on that.
Yes, exactly. As with the previous questions, you also managed to list a lot of comprehensive points for this particular questions. I think that covers pretty much everything that I would like to mention and to touch upon for this podcast. And thank you so much, Angel, for sharing your insights and the important work you're doing. One point that I really appreciate for this episodes is that you have managed also break down the acronyms and explained the important terms and steps that people will need to understand before diving into this podcast, and also very practical guides for groups, whether they have a lot of experience or little experience with UNFCCC. And it's super clear that there's a lot at stakes as we move towards COP29, and your advocacy and our colleagues as well are very crucial in ensuring that animal welfare is part of the climate resilience equations. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners, a message of hope or, of visions for animal welfare and climate change work down the road, a couple of years down the road, maybe?
Maybe just to say that every individual has the power to make a difference, starting with their own circle of influence. Some people may think that, the platform to make an impact is through these different mechanisms. Definitely it is. But I would also like to emphasize that each of us has a role to play, and you can support these efforts by raising awareness within your community, even within your own family, engaging in conversations about the link between animal welfare and climate change, and how important food is, not just bringing food to the table, but how food is grown and how that impacts animals and the planet. So whether it's through social media, personal interactions, your actions can definitely amplify our message and drive forward.
Yeah, exactly. And so I thank you once more, Angel, for this final message. And thank you to all our listeners for tuning in today to this episode of the Asia for Animals Policy Podcast. If you want to learn more about World Animal Protections and their work, please visit their website and follow them on social media. And until next time, let's continue to advocate for our animal friends and the planet. Take care.
Thanks, Ngoc Anh.
Goodbye, Angel.
Thanks for listening. You can find everything you need to know about our work and connect with us at asiaforanimals.com. Tune in for the next episode. Asia for Animals Coalition, a united voice for Asia's animals.